Entering the mid to late 2000s, the Mega Man franchise had been dealing with a bit of an issue. The games were still releasing just fine, no problems there, but with multiple different Mega Man series releasing at the same time, the market had become oversaturated. Rather than the Mega Man games competing with other games within the same genre, they'd begun to compete with themselves to an extent, Battle Network's steady decline in popularity and sales resulting from this oversaturation among other things. Though with Battle Network receiving a proper ending, even with the oversaturation, Capcom didn't want the leftover momentum of the franchise to go to waste. So to bring something new to the table while also keeping aspects of Battle Network alive, a new Mega Man series was born. Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and today I'll be talking about Mega Man Star Force. Real quick, since Star Force is so closely related to Battle Network, and I'll be mentioning various spoilery aspects of the latter, I'd recommend you watch the 2 videos I did on that series if you haven't already. Anyways, on with the video. Developed by many of the same people who'd worked on the Battle Network games, Star Force does in fact take place in the same universe as Battle Network, only 200 years later, and with that, it does retain many aspects that define the Battle Network games. For example, the game progresses between plot points and stages in the same way, the game has an analog to Battle Network's internet worlds, and you can even jack into things in a sense. Hearing that, it almost seems like the game should be called Battle Network 7, although I still haven't mentioned one thing, the battle system, which for all intents and purposes is what truly separates the two series. From the moment you hit your first random encounter, the most obvious change between the two systems is your perspective in battle, along with everything now being in 3D. Since rather than the 3x3 set of panels given to each side in Battle Network, all you have to work with in Star Force is a straight line of 3 panels. You'd think that change would simplify things, and sure, in a sense it kind of does, but at the same time it also encourages the player to focus far more on their movements and dodging. Not to mention, the game allows permanent access to a shield, which for some attacks can be absolutely necessary. To make up for these new limitations, there is one other new addition that comes in handy, the ability to lock on. Basically, no matter what attack you have, close ranged or not, if you lock onto an enemy and use it, Mega Man will jump to them and attack. Of course, this can easily fail if the enemy simply moves out of the way, but this lets you use things like swords from a distance, evening out the playing field between Mega Man and his enemies. In terms of the attacks you use, that aspect is pretty similar to Battle Network with a few notable changes. Like Battle Network, you can only get new attacks after a custom gauge charges up, but unlike Battle Network, things like codes on the attacks were removed entirely. Instead, Mega Man can only select attacks that are duplicates or are in the same vertical row. Outside of that, battles function more or less the same, and like most Battle Network games, Star Force also gives brand new forms to Mega Man. Or well, I should say form singular, because what with Star Force 1 getting split into a whopping 3 versions of itself, each version got its own unique form. Functioning like crosses from Battle Network 6 in that they're permanent until you get hit by their weakness, the form you receive can give Mega Man a few advantages. For instance, they let you select cards in a horizontal row, give unique charge shots, lock onto enemies automatically, and give a special attack if you manage to deal a counter while in the form. So basically, counters aside, they're pretty similar to the various forms in Battle Network, the main thing that sets them apart being that you can only use one if it shows up on the custom screen, not anytime you want like you could with crosses. There's not even much of a difference between the forms, to be honest, Green Dragon yielding the only unique abilities out of the 3. At least they added the brother system, where through adding characters or other real players to a friends list type thing, if your friends have another version, then you gain access to their version exclusive transformation. Plus, brothers also bestow perks that used to be accessible through Navi customization, along with a special card that contains all their favorite cards. Admittedly, I do prefer the Navi customization board over power-ups getting unlocked immediately through new brothers, but it's a neat idea to promote playing with others. And past the battle system, that's nearly all of the non-story related additions. One thing I did enjoy is in your battle card folder, Star Force added the ability to favorite up to 6 cards, which in turn allows them to be used freely in battle no matter where on the custom screen they show up. Let me tell you, favorite the right cards and you'll soon find yourself mowing down enemies left and right. However, with that, sadly, Battle Network's program advances didn't make it into Star Force 1. I guess there is the best combo system, where after you perform a series of powerful attacks against an EX or SP boss, you can then purchase a card containing that series of attacks, but it just isn't the same. In a perfect world, wouldn't it be great if there was a patch that existed which consolidated the game's 3 versions along with ironing out all the game's kinks? Well, luckily for everyone, it exists in the form of Star Force DX. I'll talk about it more later while I cover the game's plot, but along with it doing all those things and more, DX adds a much needed hard mode to the game. As I went through the original version first before playing DX, one of my main gripes with the game was its lack of real challenge until late into the game. I mean comparatively, whereas original Star Force had 2 or so fights that posed a serious challenge challenge, Legend Mode in DX made nearly every boss give me a run for my money. In fact, DX even brings in a Japanese exclusive mechanic in the form of star cards. Like some of the Battle Network games, Capcom tried to make as much money off of Star Force as possible, little accessories where you could input real cards into the game to power up their virtual counterparts getting sold once more. Taking that accessory out of the equation, star cards are an in-game way to get those enhancements that originally were only accessible through that accessory. It's honestly really neat and makes Star Force 1's battles more lively. Hell, the forms even received unique abilities to better differentiate them. If you still haven't played Star Force 1, take my word, the DX patch is the way to go. It makes playing the game on your large DS much better, trust me. I'll link it in the description for those who are interested. For me personally, it's not necessarily the combat that made Star Force 1 so enjoyable. Sure, it can be pretty fun, especially when you set up combos or get bonus cards from counters, though what truly captivated me in this game is its main story. So without further ado, let's get into it. Already starting with a much different tone compared to the upbeat shonen plots of Battle Network, our new protagonist Geostellar is depressed. 3 years ago, far out in deep space, Geo's dad was on an important mission to create peaceful relations with an alien civilization, when all of a sudden, he disappeared along with the entire space station. If it were only that, there might still be hope for his survival, but with a piece of the station falling back to Earth a few months later, it's apparent that the station and its inhabitants met a violent end. Ever since that tragedy, Geo has withdrawn from the world, living out his childhood closed off to everyone but his mom, who sadly watched him obsess over space in hopes of going there one day to find his father. For a fresh start in a new series, the way the game sets Geo up made him incredibly compelling to me. Granted, comparing this to Battle Network 1 isn't all that fair considering the devs of Star Force 1 had far more experience, but honestly, as a protagonist, Geo in the first game is a fair bit more interesting than Lan to me. Man, saying that out loud feels like sacrilege after how much fun I had with Battle Network. And speaking of Battle Network, it's not long before Mega Man.exe's Star Force counterpart barges his way into the game, HubSpot getting taken up by an alien of all things. Coming from that aforementioned planet that Geo's dad went missing near, the alien's name is Omega Sis, or Mega for short. Like all beings from Planet FM, he's an EM being made of electromagnetic waves, meaning he and the rest of his kind are normally not visible to the naked eye. The only reason Geo saw him in the first place was due to Omega shocking a pair of special glasses that originally belonged to his dad. Completing Star Force's duo, Omega more than fills the shoes of this game's sidekick, his gruff and brazen nature making him the perfect foil to the quiet and reserved Geo. Again, don't get me wrong, I love the brotherly relationship that Lan and Mega Man had throughout the 6 Battle Network games. The way they developed it over time made the games shine even brighter in my opinion, but now, having beaten Star Force 1, I think I prefer its duo. Geo and Omega growing alongside one another was just so satisfying to watch as the game's plot progressed. Plus, Omega acting up to Geo's dismay made for some real quality scenes. Rest in peace, bud. And past the main characters, the main goal of the plot is a breath of fresh air as well. You see, along with Omega arriving at Earth, a force of EM beings from Planet FM are invading the planet, many of them chasing Omega specifically to retrieve something he'd stolen from them. What's more, Omega apparently knew Geo's father at some point, his possession of that information initially keeping their shaky partnership together. Because in order for Omega to properly fend off those EM beings, he's got to fuse with Geo, their partnership creating an all-new Mega Man. I love how Omega's just chilling here as Geo's left hand. In his wave change form, Geo is able to explore Star Force's cyberworld counterpart, the Wave World, a series of environments composed of EM waves that house all sorts of beings from friendly Hertzes, which are the counterparts to Progs, to EM viruses, which are the enemies you encounter in the game. They even brought back the ability to jump into various electronics, one of my absolute favorite features from Battle Network. Granted, it is a bit different considering you can only enter them from the Wave World, but that sense of discovery is still maintained as Geo needs to interact with some of them to unlock them. The way the Wave World is layered on top of the real one is such a cool thing in my opinion. It never got old switching the Wave World on and off with the press of a button. Things may feel familiar in numerous ways, but there's no question that with a start like that, Star Force quickly makes itself into its own thing. That being said, the gameplay loop of going from stage to stage throughout the plot remains, thankfully without all that much filler to gunk it up. And for the first one, in comes this game's first round of side characters. Ever obsessed with being a perfect class president, Luna, followed by 2 boys named Bud and Zack target Geo almost immediately to persuade him to return to school. That's about all they are for the first few arcs of the game too, Luna in particular being a character I really didn't like at first. Good thing she gets her own arc later on that develops her beyond the threshold of typical tsunderes. Sadly, can't really say the same for Bud and Zack. You can pretty accurately guess their entire characters from their designs, though I still enjoyed Bud a fair bit. Who doesn't like lovable meatheads? And speaking of Bud, this game's first scenario revolves around him, where after Omega displays his lack of social awareness by performing his signature mega uppercut, Luna threatens to end their friendship by cutting their brother band if he gets beaten up again. Seriously, she sucks so much in this part of the game. In his loneliness following that, this is when the game shows another proper Ephemian that isn't just one of the lower level lackeys, Taurus. Attracted to Bud's loneliness much like how Omega was to Geo's loneliness, this different approach to the game's antagonists is really neat, since in almost every arc, the antagonists are born from Ephemians taking advantage of characters when they're at their lowest. Thus, with that framework, it's perfect for facilitating character growth, the Ephemians breaking out the worst in people and their defeat allowing said characters to learn how to be better. Plus, in basing the Ephemians off of constellations, Star Force becomes even more independent from the Mega Man franchise as a whole, which is a nice change. As much as I loved Navi's getting based off of pre-existing robot masters from the main platformer series, straying from that allows Star Force much more freedom to do whatever it wants. So with Bud giving in to his desire for revenge, he wave transforms into Taurus Fire, his comp space taking place inside the car he used to nearly run over Geo. Like how they worked in Battle Network, Star Force's comp spaces are more or less the same, each one bearing a main mechanic you need to overcome to reach the boss. What's new in terms of Star Force is the addition of touch controls, which above anything is why the DX version is absolutely necessary. Sure, if you manage to obtain a physical copy they're easy enough, though coming from someone who played both the original and DX versions on the wide DS, I still have the nightmares from failing over and over. Hell, even if you're watching this and have only emulated the original version, you owe it to yourself to play the DX patch. But I digress. After you ride all the bulls in the stage, Geo comes face to face with Bud, Taurus controlling him in their waveform. Too bad him being the game's first boss kind of dooms him to getting demolished immediately. I will say, with Star Force's bosses in general, the little intro they get is a good touch. May as well take advantage of the game's 3D battles. However, with Taurus now gone, Bud returns to his senses, his character growing from the experience like I mentioned earlier. More importantly, Geo's view on the matter reveals just how much grief has affected the kid's view on relationships, as in his mind, if he avoids getting to know people, they won't be able to hurt him. So on that depressing note, Star Force's first little arc is over, the game immediately moving on to the next scenario. Oh, but real quick, there is one thing I neglected to mention up until now, since while they may not have that prominent of a role in society anymore, Navis still exist in Star Force. It's just that with net battling falling out of style at some point, they essentially exist purely to facilitate human society through a variety of functions. Throughout the game, there's even some you can use to bypass specific obstacles, though that's about it. I wonder if even 200 years later, the Colonel and Iris that patrol the internet still exist. Hell, they're probably the reason net battling died out. Anyways, in this arc, Geo gets to know more side characters, Aaron Boreal, an old friend of Geo's father who runs an astronomy lab, and Tom Dubious, one of Aaron's co-workers. Starting now, Star Force really begins packing in a ton of character development in each arc, like this time the Ephemian of the week is Cygnus, who through taking advantage of Tom's mistrust of others due to a past betrayal, leads him to becoming Cygnus Wing and trapping Geo and friends in a space simulator. If that wasn't enough to keep them from escaping, he manipulates them into perpetually dancing, the space simulator itself supposedly also having a vacuum environment. Even if he's possessed by an alien energy bird, that's a bit extreme when you're just trying to get revenge against one guy. You don't have to put multiple kids in mortal danger. Guess it wouldn't be a game in the Battle Network universe without kids constantly having near-death experiences. The stage itself in this scenario is really neat though, its main mechanics consisting of dodging these endless shooting stars and punting the little ducks that shoot them at you. Above that, the music in this one is what really makes it shine in my eyes, the song incorporating the game's main theme, just like how the second stage of Battle Network 1 did. I wonder if that was intentional. And dancing at the end of the stage, Cygnus Wing is a step up from Taurus Flame. He's still pretty easy all things considered, but the obstacles he can spawn did sometimes get the better of me, especially in his harder versions. Following his defeat, the way Boreal convinces him that betrayal isn't all there is somewhat speaks to the internal struggle going on inside Geo, his refusal to form relationships slowly getting chipped away whether he realizes it or not. With pretty much every arc in Star Force, things continue on like this arc ending with Geo slowly becoming friends with Luna's entourage. So while at this point Geo's begun to learn that maybe relationships are worth the risk of being hurt, in the next arc he'll learn that he's not the only one who suffers from loss. However, before we get to that, this is when Star Force's first optional boss shows up, Cancer Bubble. Without a doubt one of my favorite wave changes in the game, Cancer Bubble was the first fight that overwhelmed me a bit. I still beat him first try, but getting stuck in one of his bubbles can lead to him getting a combo off on you before you know it. And with the cards you get from beating him, those combos can quickly be used against him. Considering that every enemy you hit with this attack gets bubbled usually, following up with an electric aspected attack is the best, since bubbled enemies take more damage from electricity. Whereas Grass Stage Cheese was something I relied on for a good few Battle Network games, Cancer Bubble followed by a paralyzing card was something I did countless times. I'm confident that the rest of you did too. Though back to Depression O'Clock, in this arc, Geo meets a character named Sonya Strum, a famous idol who seemingly everyone is a fan of. Well, everyone except Geo, who watches her practice a new song before she leaves the Vista to Geo. And as much as I want to talk about her surprisingly sad backstory, Geo first has to deal with the only semi-capable adult in this world, Bob Copper, a special policeman who's been tracking the waves FMians emit, which would pose a problem for Geo if not for the help of one of the navies you gain access to. That's the good thing with this game, rather than spending way too long sending you back through areas you've already been in, the most it'll have is minor still important segments like this. Or if you're going back through an area for plot reasons, there's usually a boss fight tied to the segment. In other words, the devs learned not to pull another Freeze Man, or, well, half of Battle Network 4 again. Though on the topic of internet-only segments, here's the first equivalent of that in Star Force. In reality, the only reason Sonya became an idol in the first place was because she wanted to make music for her bedridden mother, it snowballing from there until she got scouted at an audition. The problem she faces now while she's dealing with her grief from her mother passing is her manager is constantly pestering her to make more music purely so that they can profit, directly conflicting with her initial goal of just doing it to make her mother happy. In a game with a few notable scumbags, the manager may very well be at the top of the list, as he hits Geo aside to take Sonya away. Of course, this leads to Lyra, the next FMian, taking advantage of the situation to wave change into Harp Note, but this is one of the instances where I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, before that, the guy was literally screaming at what I'm pretty sure is a 12-year-old to keep singing against her will. That manager honestly deserved way more than getting a guitar to the face. Weirdly enough, later on there's a side quest where you straight up help him get a new idol. It's almost as if the person who decided the side quests and wrote this arc were two entirely different people. Though regardless, Geo's got to stop that FMian from taking advantage of Sonya, the Wave World segment actually having a unique mechanic to spice up going through areas you've already been before. Like Taurus Flame stage, this is another must to play with the DX patch, and once you catch up to Harp Note, this fight is also on the easier side, her pattern of alternating between using speakers or her guitar becoming pretty predictable. By now, I'm sure you're sensing a pattern with the base game's overall difficulty. Then, as Geo gets a chance to talk to Sonya, him bringing Sonya back to her senses actually does more to develop Geo than Sonya, the issues he's going through giving Geo an outside perspective of his internal struggles. So bonding through the fact that both of them have been experiencing loss and people who refuse to understand them, Geo forms his first brother band with Sonya after she performs her final concert. For an arc that they didn't even assign a stage to, the whole scenario surrounding Sonya surpassed my expectations by a mile. Unlike the other FMians, Lyra is also a bit different, choosing to stay behind and fight them like Omega has. Sonya's brother band is good to have too, what with it bringing along both undershirt and a barrier. On the surface level, this is great for Geo as he's beginning to come out of his shell, but unbeknownst to him, certain all-powerful beings have become aware of him. To preface this segment, in Star Force's society, just about everything concerning the Wave World is managed by these three satellites: the Pegasus satellite, the Leo satellite, and the Dragon satellite. Sound familiar? Well, it should, considering each of those satellites actually houses an alien like Omega, only rather than coming from planet FM, they're from its neighboring planet, planet AM. At some point, FM civilization annihilated AMs much like they're about to do with Earth, the satellite admins being some of the only survivors of the attack. You'd think that this would be a cause for concern, but frankly, thinking back to Battle Network 6, I'd take this over the Judge Tree any day. Like you'd expect, the titular Star Force comes from them as well, Geo obtaining it later after completing their trial and fighting the one that corresponds to your version. The cool thing about the DX version here is while normally you'd only be able to fight one of them, the patch adds in 2 new segments further on into the game where you can fight the other 2 admins along with gaining their Star Force. What's funny to me is out of the 3, Pegasus Sky, the first one I fought originally, remained the hardest out of the 3, its ability to freeze you making the other fights nothing in comparison. I don't even want to think about its post-game version. But let's not get too ahead of things here. All throughout this, Geo's been making some pretty big strides in his non-Mega Man life too, Luna finally breaking him into going to school and his teacher there, Mr. Shepard, being a top-tier character in every sense. While not to the extent Star Force takes things here, this arc rings a bit close to home when it comes to my past schooling experiences, as in the school, Mr. Shepard has a unique teaching style compared to every other teacher there. You see, in probably the most dystopian thing in Star Force, most of the school's classes teach kids by beaming radiation directly into their brains that teaches them courses. Like any other rational human being, Mr. Shepard doesn't want to use the study wave on his classes, though after the principal threatens to fire him, Mr. Shepard has to choose between the kids in his class or his 6 children back at home. It's an exaggeration, sure, but this arc in particular reflects real life a fair amount. I mean, just recalling back to my experiences, with pretty much all of my schools slowly caring about doing well on tests rather than actually learning, any teacher that taught the curriculum in a unique way would either lose their position or have to homogenize their lesson plans. Later on in high school, I did have a few solid teachers that did things a bit differently, but I remember my middle school specifically did that to a few of my teachers. Of all things, I didn't expect Star Force to focus an arc around something like that. Again, this game just can't miss. In his dilemma between choosing the school kids or his actual kids, an Ephemian named Libra shows up to take advantage like the rest, Mr. Shepard utilizing the study wave the next day to all the kids' dismay. Thus, so that Geo's classmates don't end up more tumor than child, Geo enters what's probably my favorite stage of the game. The mechanics in it are pretty fun, it tasking you with solving problems quickly to avoid damage. However, aside from that, the theme of the stage is great. It's weird because if I'm not mistaken, it's the only song in the game that uses the sound font from Battle Network 5's DS port. Makes sense considering the composer for this song also worked on that port. Then, in the Libra Scales fight, in the base version, he's just about as easy as the rest of them, mostly due to how slow moving he is. So with that, the school kids' brain cells are saved, Mr. Shepard still getting fired, but being brought back after every kid petitioned for his return. Like the rest, it's another solid arc, Geo's character even progressing enough to the point where he conveniently plays Mega Man in Luna's play. Up until now, Luna's been pretty much the same character-wise, bossing everyone around and channeling the true essence of the tsundere. She's even begun to develop a crush for Geo, nudging herself closer to even more basic tropes. Yet like I said earlier on, the game thankfully develops her past this in her own arc, and we've now reached that point, since after saving her from some Ephemian lackeys, it's revealed that all of her tendencies come directly from her over-controlling parents. Nice save, Star Force. Can't really say the same for Zack, whose character essentially boils down to the nerdy short kid, but at least you salvaged Luna before it was too late, because in their disdain for public school, they plan to uproot Luna's entire social circle by putting her in a more rigorous private school. If that weren't enough, in what's now her last week in Echo Ridge, nobody seems to have time for her, even Geo going out for the day with Sonya. It's a sad situation, no question, though still, I'm not sure if that entirely excuses her from then deciding to low-key stalk Geo for the day. At least it comes back to get her big time, since she follows the two into an exhibit her parents created, Luna getting caught by them in the process. Along with treating Luna like an object they own, her parents weirdly seem to hate all other kids as well, further explaining how Luna became the way she is. Too bad Geo and Sonya couldn't chase after her in time, since in her emotionally shattered state, an Ephemian named Ophiucha takes advantage of her anger to control all the snakes in the exhibit, trapping everyone inside and nearly killing her own parents. These arcs just keep getting darker every time. Hell, she almost gets Geo with a poisonous snake, if not for Sonya taking the bite for him. So in response, it's time to avenge Sonya. Queen Ophiucha's stage revolving around, you guessed it, snakes. The main mechanic here involving Mega Man bringing antidotes to Hertz's while avoiding massive snakes that chase you. Like those that came before it, pretty straightforward. What is worth noting is before the stage's boss fight, Ophiucha drops the info that the reason Ephemians have been pursuing Omega has been due to him possessing the key to their planet-destroying weapon, Andromeda. So with the actual fight, it's a bit more challenging, but not by much. If anything, it fittingly reminded me a bit of SnakeMan.exe's fight, what with the barrage of snakes Ophiucha sends out. All in all, still pretty easy, even more so if you have the Leo Star Force at your disposal. In fact, for this scenario, Ophiucha double dies, another Ephemian named Gemini assassinating her for her incompetence. Luckily, after that fiasco, Luna's parents seem to have finally realized the errors of their ways. You see, everyone, take it from Star Force, violence really is the answer. I may still prefer Shepard's arc to Luna's, but that's not to say I didn't enjoy hers. I'm glad the game decided to make her more than what she initially appeared to be. It was pretty funny seeing her react to Geo's true identity as Mega Man, though let's be honest, if I had to pick the best Star Force heroine here, there's a clear winner. In turn, now that the game's gone over trust issues, exploitation, crappy school boards, and bad parenting, surely the natural progression now is dissociative identity disorder. Enter Pat. He was introduced back when Geo first went back to school as a pretty friendly kid. Like Geo did with Sonya, the two connect over their experiences with loss, only that in Pat's case, it's probably the darkest in the game. Essentially, whoever Pat's parents were abandoned him in a trash heap. The only reason he didn't didn't die right then and there being due to a robot who sorts garbage finding him. This arc is honestly the most important one aside from the final one, because it's here that Geo truly grows past his former self. Even his little portrait's not depressed anymore. It's too bad that, like he used to fear, Pat uses Geo's trust against him, or rather Ray, his other personality, does. Created from the trauma of growing up alone due to being left to die in garbage, Ray is the polar opposite of Pat, his personality leaning much more towards violence. Thus, Geo's recovery gets entirely shattered from this, his old mindset of shutting himself off from the world to protect himself returning full force. It's here that Geo's gotta learn that things don't always go the way you think they will. What matters is that you press on with your life no matter what. A pretty profound message for a game like this. Oh, and Pat's been hosting Gemini all along, but I'm sure that was pretty obvious. Sadly, following that juicy character development is probably the worst stage in the game. Though hold on now, Geo's got some stuff to take care of before getting led into what's absolutely a trap. I mean, there's a whole new optional boss available, Wolfwood's raising the challenge a bit and overall presenting an interesting fight. With him, if the full moon isn't obscured, he becomes temporarily invincible, requiring the player to hone their dodging skills. His battle card may not be as good as Cancer Bubbles, but its 2 hits do come in handy. Going back to the junkyard, whereas Pat's betrayal shattered Geo, this is where the Star Force devs betrayed me. I mean, just look at them all. How could they do this to me after all the Battle Network I played? I was hoping Battle Network would get referenced other than the quest you can get through using the DS GBA slot, but come on. When I first noticed the mass of rotting pets in the garbage heap, I had to sit there and process it. They knew exactly what they were doing. Here, since I streamed this game, I can show you. No! No, the pets, no! God damn you! No! I saw that for a second. No. Anyways, in the heart of all the garbage, there's the scrap comp. I'm not gonna exaggerate and say it's toy RoboComp bad, because that's plain mean. It's just by far the least fun out of all of Star Force 1's stages, since in order to progress, you've got to use the touchscreen to find Hertz's buried in the trash. Sure, it's doable, and the game helps you out by giving landmarks where they're supposed to be around too, but trying to pinpoint their location while dealing with random encounters and these bulldozers that can send you to the center of the area got a fair bit frustrating. Even on the DX patch, where they change it to where the sonar is constantly going off on Mega Man's location, it was still somewhat tedious. Good thing Junkman.exe isn't around to see this. To salvage things a bit, the fight with Gemini Spark is thankfully pretty cool, considering they're split into 2 enemies rather than 1, though the 2 attack you independently, which threw me for a loop. Even then, the amount of cards you have at this point is more than enough to take them down. In DX's Legend mode, they actually made it so that any damage you do to Pat heals Ray, a mechanic that honestly makes the fight feel way more complete. Sadly, after you kick Gemini into deep space, Geo and Pat don't magically make up like you'd expect, the latter leaving Geo utterly crushed. So despite Geo getting emotionally set back all the way to how he was at the start of the game, it's time for the final arc. Compared to Battle Network's equivalent of this in Battle Network 3, Geo falls to much lower lows than Lan ever did, the game showing him spiral into depression as he pushes everyone away from him, including Omega, who decided to leave the kid to defend the Earth. Luckily for Geo, the oncoming apocalypse serves as one hell of a wake-up call for him, the satellite admins making him realize that it hasn't only been Geo's character growing all game. Like I said at the start, Omega's been changing a lot too. It's done in a far more subtle way, but from how he first appeared, manipulating Geo through withholding information about his stranded father, Omega's begun to gain empathy, as much as he'd like to hide it behind his rough exterior. In general, it's pretty good writing for our main duo, their arc of learning from each other elevating Star Force by a lot for me. Thus, when the 2 reunite after Geo's realized that Omega truly does care for him, it makes their comeback all the sweeter, Geo getting developed further as he goes around restoring the brother bands he'd cut earlier. In fact, he even gains a new brother band with Bud, the super armor it gives being necessary for what's up ahead. Because in a big turn of events, the space station Geo's dad was on is coming back to Earth, only now it's host to the FM King, dead set on annihilating the planet for good. In retrospect, I really like the way this is all set up, since thinking back to the very start of the game, technically the first thing shown to you is what would eventually be the game's final stage. So after reassuring everyone that he'll return safely, it's time to put the star in Star Force as Geo goes to space. For what's only the first Star Force game, it's pretty wild how this finale reaches the levels of Battle Network 3's finale almost immediately, making sure to squeeze in those Geo's Navi mechanics at the very end of the game, the derelict space station is barely holding itself together as is, the actual stage itself taking place in doors you've got to unlock to move forward. And in said stages, they're unique, I'll give them that. Accompanied by a top quality theme that lived up to my expectations set by Battle Network, the station comp is a memory game of sorts. Simply put, in order to proceed, you've got to jump around the area to get a good look at the constellation shown in the center. Then, if you've got a good idea of what it looks like, you've got to draw it to reach that section's boss. It may not be my favorite final stage if you include all the Battle Network ones, but it's fairly doable if you draw them all on the side like I did. I even came close to guessing one of them without looking around. Other than that, it's a standard fight all the game's bosses situation. Before Geo reaches the FM King, however, Omega tells him the truth of his father's fate. Good news is, he's not dead. He's just trapped wandering space for all eternity as a bundle of living EM waves. Better than getting killed by the FM King, I guess. What matters to Geo is that now, he knows for sure that his dad could be out there, the duo making their way to Cepheus, the king of planet FM. As opposed to how menacing he's been built up to be, Cepheus turns out to be pathetic, his mind riddled with paranoia that everyone is out to get him, that same paranoia leading to the demise of planet AM and soon Earth. And in another shocking twist, Omega reveals he wasn't even from planet FM all along, but instead one of the few survivors of planet AM. This single reveal fleshes Omega out so much more, all the times Geo said he could never understand him being further from the truth than he could ever imagine. In reality, Omega lost everything when AM was attacked, the only thing it left him with being the burning desire for revenge against Cepheus. Despite their differences of personalities on the surface, Geo and Omega have actually been going through the same problems, one just much more drastic than the other. Thus, with the game uniting the two more than ever before, it's time to face Star Force's final boss, Andromeda. Getting a special intro fitting of a fight this massive, Andromeda is easily the coolest fight in the game, its theme fitting in perfectly with all of Battle Network's solid final boss tracks. In terms of difficulty, like the rest of the base game, it's nothing crazy, but you'll quickly die if you're not keeping track of its attacks, especially in Andromeda's second phase, where after you deal enough damage, it transforms into its battle form, the design for this part becoming an immediate favorite of mine. Sick transformation sequences like that are the exact thing I wanted out of this game switching to 3D models. In its new slick design, it's no joke too, Andromeda taking on the familiar mechanic of only being vulnerable when its core is glowing. That second form always threw me off whenever it slammed the entire battlefield, considering it's just as big as the battlefield itself. It's a solid fight all around. So with Geo and Omega destroying the planet destroyer, everything is saved. Or well, it is after there's the necessary segment of Geo's friends giving him strength. Gotta work it in somehow. Now all that's left is Cepheus, who without his guard and weapon is utterly harmless. But rather than taking revenge like he'd come all the way here to do, Omega's grown as a character, allowing Geo the opportunity to reconcile with Cepheus. Like most of this game's characters, he too has a pretty messed up backstory, his paranoia originating from everyone he's known backstabbing him all his life for a chance to take his place. And you know, boohoo and all that, but when you attempt multiple genocides, even if you are kind of manipulated into doing it, that kind of crosses the line of forgiveness. Though for the sake of peace, Geo becomes friends with a war criminal, Cepheus leaving with the 3 satellite admins to begin Planet AM's revival. How they're gonna do that with the planet destroyed beats me, but I'm sure they'll figure out something. All that's left now is for Geo to get back home, and the space station conveniently beginning to break apart right before he wave changes. Following that, this upcoming scene does the whole friendship power trope much better, each of Geo's friends using their trancers to beam a signal to Geo so that he can return to Earth. Even his father seemingly helps somewhat, Geo getting a chance to briefly talk to him in his mind and using that motivation to not only believe in his friends to go back to Echo Ridge, but finally gain the capacity to move on from the loss that's hung over him the entire game. In my opinion, they couldn't have set up these dual protagonists better than they did in the first Star Force game. Above all the game's different parts, their growth as they continued to interact with each other was the primary factor that drove me to continue playing, the side characters complementing the main arc as they grew alongside them. You can tell that with the experience gained from making Battle Network, A New Beginning is exactly what they needed to tell a story that goes above and beyond. Maybe if you don't value stories in games as much as me, you might think of Star Force 1 differently, but like I said before, it's 100% of what made this game for me. That's not to say there isn't more after that. Like every Battle Network game, Star Force has its own post-game area, the conditions to unlock it coinciding with its Battle Network counterparts. While you go around fighting all the harder forms of bosses and collecting battle cards, however, there is one more bonus fight only accessible after you beat the game, Crown Thunder. Probably my favorite design out of all the normal bosses, his fight keeps you on your toes as he jumps all over the place. Just look at him go. And when it comes to the actual post-game area, it's fine for what it is. It may not have all new fights necessarily, but at the end of its 3 areas, depending on your version, there's a fight with your specific satellite admin. Or if you're playing the DX patch, all 3 fights are made available available, the post-game feeling much fuller as a side effect. Almost as if these version differences solely serve to fragment the game in an attempt for more sales instead of delivering a full complete game. Interesting how that works. Basically amounting to a harder version of their shadow fight, each admin works just about how they did before. Leo and Dragon gave me a fair bit of challenge, sure, though Pegasus was the first fight in this game to utterly shatter me into a million pieces. Especially with its SP fight, it's easily the hardest battle in the entirety of Star Force 1. Just getting frozen once here can mean losing half your health, Pegasus chaining attacks off on you before you can even figure out an opening. If you do manage to defeat it, there's not much else to the post-game, the harder Andromeda fight still being easier than Pegasus Sky SP, and Zack's brother band being a thing for anyone who wants that. One thing that took me by surprise is in deep space, Geo can actually get his dad's Trancer. Along with a powerful weapon for Omega packed with it, the Trancer contains a pretty sad message for Geo where his father laments about never being able to see him again. What a depressing note to end off on. Except again in the DX patch, they made sure to add a fair bit more, including one extra fight that wasn't in the original, a mysterious figure appearing in Vista Point CM Road to see how powerful Geo is. Without a doubt providing an equal challenge as the game's hardest fights if you turn on Legend mode, this figure is in actuality a neat way to connect Star Force 1 with its sequel. It's pretty necessary too, as this fight does more to connect these two games than the entirety of either of them, but that'll be for a future video. Oh, and like the latter half of Battle Network, Star Force 1 would also be host to a Boktai crossover. It's nothing much compared to the one in Battle Network 6 that had its own boss fight, but it's there. Ironic how despite the Boktai character telling Geo they'll meet again, Lunar Nights would be the final Boktai game. I get that it's due to Boktai's lack of popularity in the West, but it's still weird how they once again removed this in localization. Good thing the DX patch brings it back. All in all, that's Star Force 1's post-game. It's a nice dessert following the full course meal that was this game's story. Looking back through Star Force 1, it's a pretty good start to what Capcom was already gearing up to be their new shining star. While I will admit I did have more fun with Battle Network 6's battle system, the new system in Star Force was pretty good too. What's most important is in its initial stage here, there's loads of ways they could add on to it. When it comes to the rest, you can tell the dev team learned a lot from Battle Network, many of its series-wide issues like backtracking filler not popping up nearly as much in this first entry. To be fair, it wasn't without its flaws, the original system of going into transfers for side quests one at a time getting a bit annoying, though hey, that's where the DX patch comes in as it allows you to take on multiple quests. Hell, the DX patch even lets you get cards that were originally Japan exclusive due to events. And outside of the game itself, Capcom tried to give Star Force the full Battle Network treatment, the game receiving an anime, merchandise, and anything else to profit off of what they hoped would be a new big success. Unfortunately, even though it had such a promising start, its 2006 release was met with god-awful reviews. I swear, this happens to every other video I make at this point, but what are these criticisms? Too similar to Battle Network? Yeah, nice going, genius. What were you expecting from the spiritual successor of Battle Network? For it to be a visual novel dating simulator? Underwhelming graphics? Okay, seriously, what did these people think the DS was capable of? Star Force already brought in the 3D battle system. Did they think it'd come packaged with a VR headset? Some of these straight up list the story and random encounters as a negative point. First of all, convenient that you can easily dismiss the story like that without bringing up any points of real criticism about it, but really, random encounters, they're not even remotely bad in Star Force. Well, at least not yet. If games continue to make use of aspects proven to work in previous games, it's not something to be criticized, especially if they build onto it. Keep in mind, Battle Network 4 got better reviews than Star Force. I'll just let that sink in. Like seriously, Star Force wasn't flawless, but it never deserved such a fate like that. If anything, now that there seems to be a pretty solid amount of people that have stuck with Battle Network and Star Force, it's time to get these massively underrated games out there. No joke, while I'd heard of Battle Network before I played them, I'd never heard of Star Force until I'd played a couple Battle Network games. Especially with the DX patch fixing a lot, now is the time to play Star Force 1. Spread the word, guys. Thus, even with its lackluster sales due to poor reviews and general franchise fatigue, Star Force would still get enough to earn its first sequel, Mega Man Star Force 2. Except rather than covering every game in one video like I have been, I'll be giving each one its own video. That way, I'll be able to devote more time to making sure I've covered absolutely everything correctly, and hey, you guys will also get more videos, so it's a win-win. In fact, unlike how I went through Battle Network, I've already beaten Star Force 2 at this point. I won't say anything about it now, though oh man, I've got some choice opinions I can't wait to let out into the world. The game I haven't started yet is Star Force 3, which I've been personally looking forward to for a good while as everyone tells me it's great. And like I did with the first two games, I'll be streaming it over on my Twitch tomorrow at 8 PM EST. If you can't catch it or want to check out the VODs of Star Force 1 or 2, I always put everything up on my my VOD channel, do check it out. Actually, I haven't even decided what version of 3 I'll be playing, so in the interest of letting you guys have a hand in things, I'll leave it up to you all to vote on my Twitter for which version I do play. The poll should be up when this video releases. Regardless, despite what you may have heard from crappy review sites, Star Force was a promising start to a new series, the game filling the Battle Network-shaped hole in my heart and bringing in just enough uniqueness to be its own thing. And now, to those who've continued to help out the channel, I'd like to give a heartfelt thank you to Ali Elman, Cognitive Dissonance, and everyone else who've decided to contribute. You guys are the best. If you want to help me continue making more in-depth videos like these, and receive a special thank you amongst a lot of other bonus content, do check out my Patreon, a link in the description. Well, thus begins my coverage of the Star Force games. Let me know what you thought of this video in terms of splitting them up instead of packing everything into a singular massive video. I know for me, I've got to thank all of you who've been tuning into my Star Force streams. They've been a good time. I've been looking forward to playing Star Force 3, as according to a lot of people, it's apparently the best one. Guess I'll see for myself tomorrow. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.